What was going on long ago in what is today Western Bolivia? What lost knowledge and lost history examples do we have in copious amounts around the world? Megalithic structures and sites quickly come to mind. There's no consensus between academia as to how some sites were created and why. What I'd like to do is cover a megalithic site in Peru and one of its major platform sites. They're excellent examples of what seems to be a lost and forgotten past. The megalithic sites in what is today Western Bolivia is Tiahuanaco and its Puma Punku subsite. I want to start this off by discussing Hans Schindler Bellamy. I consider him one of the original conspiracy theorists, ufologist, paranormal investigator, and megalithic researcher. What he argued about in his book was that both sites, now above 12,000 feet, were originally located at sea level. He argued that something so catastrophic affected the planet that the sites were instantly thrown up miles into the air. Nearby Lake Titicaca could also quite possibly have originated as being part of the ocean off the shores of Peru. Bellamy goes on to explain that there were multiple occupations of the area and multiple builds, each group building on top of or attaching to what the last group of humans at the site started. This is a very common practice that makes it extremely difficult to date artifacts and occupation periods because of overlap. It's possible that these groups of people were not even related. This slide is from Ancient Arts of the Andes by Wendell Clark Bennett. Scientists say there was no written language during the prehistoric period in South America, but this small fragment that has engravings on it clearly looks like Olmec and Mayan glyph writing, yet it was found in Tiahuanaco. Most information from television shows does little justice to providing historical information when it comes to the site of Tiahuanaco. What you mostly hear about are H-style bricks, large blocks, and what is on this slide, the Gateway of the Sun at Tiahuanaco. We are told that the city peaked in population around 800 AD with approximately 20,000 inhabitants. What almost always gets left out of the information is the amazing amount of work that took place around the turn of the 20th century by one Arthur Poznański. He was a well-respected avocational archaeologist that settled in the area and began an extensive field investigation of the megalithic sites. He would later date the site to being 11 to 17,000 years old. Now, modern-day archaeologists insist the site is no older than 2,000 years. This is mostly due to incorrect carbon-14 dating and the fact that anthropologists insist the people that inhabited Tiahuanaco had no written language. Yet I just showed you on the last slide that this thinking was incorrect. You may have heard of Poznański, but he is not key in my historical review. Instead, here is what is important. Poznański went back to Europe and presented his findings. From this, he got 4 very important scientists to spend the next 3 to 15 years of their lives down in South America, conducting research that had incredible finds and implications on the history of our planet. This data and most of their work has intentionally been buried or discarded by modern-day academia. Dr. Hans Ludendorff from the Potsdam Observatory was a German astronomer and astrophysicist. Dr. Arnold Kohlschutter was an astronomer and astrophysicist from the Bonn Observatory. Dr. Rolf Müller was an astrophysicist from the Astrophysical Institute of Potsdam. And Dr. Friedrich Becker was an astronomer of the Vatican Observatory. They all set out to Tiahuanaco to carry out astrographic studies and check the astronomic archaeological investigations of Poznański. Over the next 15 years, they would write multiple books and articles on the topics of these 2 sites and other archaeological sites in South America. One of the more important writings, if you have time to read, would be volume 14 of the Beisler Archive, pages 123 through 142. It composes the original work carried out in the Temple of the Sun, Kalasasaya. Their extensive works should have attracted the attention of the scientific and pseudoscientific world, but since their findings were on such a complex subject that defied then and now archaeological standards and beliefs, there were no persons willing to conduct investigations into the matter and with research goals to check their incredible findings. So here's what they found. They realized there were 3 different periods of build. Period 1 was well before periods 2 and 3, so much so that the scientists had to continue checking the data for several years. Eventually they had to come to the belief that the data was not wrong. The data showed periods 2 beginning 15,000 BCE. This made them deductively reason that period 1 began at or before 20,000 BCE. Their findings also showed that the building that took place in period 1 used far greater math and had much better design and construction work. But the scientists scratched their heads and asked how that could be. For that to be true, they realized that archaic man could not have just come out of caves during the dark ages of man and begin constructing monumental megalithic structures. It would have taken thousands of additional years for those period 1 builders to learn that advanced technology and science. They also questioned why period 2 construction was not better than period 1, but inferior. What they also could not understand was how could such a large population of people survive through farming and husbandry at such a high elevation. Further research and data collection led them to believe that Tiahuanaco and Puma Punku were quite possibly at much lower elevation, maybe sea level during and prior to period 1 build. So this is what they studied, researched, and drew conclusions from. First, the draining canals had lost their lineal form through movement of the subsoil, and they were laterally entirely twisted and curving. This could have only been done by uplift, then instantaneous lowered elevation, followed by another intense geological uplift. Second, the scientists showed that the entire temple of Kalasasaya was a true solar observatory located on the astronomic meridian, at the same time making it a magnificent stone calendar. Something to also ponder over, this was during the period 2 build, well after original occupation. Third, the astrophysicists recognized that there was a difference of approximately 18 angular minutes, that's 0.3 degrees, which represents the change in the obliquity of the ecliptic between that of the period in which Kalasasaya was built and during the time the measurements were taken, which was around 1930. Fourth, the pilasters, which are rectangular columns of the Sun Temple, worked in a hardened andesitic lava, were tested and data documented for erosion change over time. Comparing their erosion with that of the works of period 3, show a massive space of time transpired between period 1 and the other 2 periods. Now, I believe it's also only fair to present a counter-argument. So carbon-14 dating at several locations shows occupation only being 1,500 to 2,000 years old. All the data from Poznansky is stated to be discredited due to the site having been ransacked and altered for hundreds of years, making measurements worthless. This data was looked at and presented in 1981, 1994, and 1998. But here's my counter to this. No one could discredit the other 4 scientists, so they took a stance that because of the alterations to the building over hundreds of years, none of their data could be accurate. Also, how could 4 astrophysicists know that the temple was set up to be an observatory? Now, mind you, I'm being sarcastic. This was being questioned by 3 archaeologists about astrophysicists. That's incredible. Now remember that carbon-14 dating required that organic materials be tested. So I've conducted multiple carbon-14 dating tests myself in the university. Could their samples taken have been from later occupation campfires or other charred remains by people wandering through the area or residing there at a much later time period? So basically this argument works both ways. Now my very good friend Dr. Bruce Cornett, who's a geologist and was a member of NIDS, National Institute for Discovery Sciences, working for Robert Bigelow, stated he fully believes both are partially correct. He states it looks more like a giant tsunami deposited the Pacific Ocean above 12,000 feet during a major catastrophic event. Now mind you, most of what we see today on television is only period 2 and period 3 build. The gate of the sun is from period 3. The far more precise build and material is mostly below ground or still in the quarry, too heavy to have been lifted after period 1, which had far superior construction and technology capabilities. Okay, now here is additional proof that the German scientists gathered. 1. It's evident beyond a doubt that the inhabitants of Tiahuanaco knew animals now extinct, which they reproduced on their ceramics and other artifacts. These creatures most likely disappeared at the end of the last period of glaciation on the Altiplano. 2. Certain human crania found in the deepest strata of Tiahuanaco are completely fossilized. And that takes at least 10,000 years. Finally, for the strange factor, in the Period 1 archaeological record of the Altiplano, around where the two sites are located, people were not living in homes. They were still living in semi-subterranean dwellings, including temples and dwellings for the ruling class. In these dwellings, people remained and slept in a squatting position. This practice in the area continued into Period 2 and 3 in some places. So how in the hell did these people from Period 1 build such megalithic structures, then to return to their underground home to squat in an archaic form of sleep technique for the night? Could these structures have been the works of the gods or deities of old, maybe using humans as a workforce? And who were they if this is true? Please follow me for more to come. I will be continuing to post about the giants of old, lost ancient cultures, and everything Uintah Basin. Yes, that includes Skinwalker Ranch. Take care.